besides the dilapidated buildings that happened because of the continuous hurricanes all the time. But there was nothing there. It was like a ghost town. Um, Golden Rock was at its prime. It was a beautiful shopping center. Sunny Isles was certainly at its prime. Uh, Lorraine Shopping Center was at its prime. Pizza Hut, McDonald's. We had Barker's back then. Not Woolworths or Kmart. Some people remember Woolworths. That was in Sunny Isles, and then came Kmart. St. Croix actually had more theaters. In St. Thomas, we still only had Cinema One. St. Croix had they had the Sunny Isles. I think it was 4 theaters or twin theaters at that time. They had Alexander Theater downtown, as well as Lorraine had a theater as well too. There was a drive-in. Drive-ins are a thing of the past. People don't remember that. But, the same set of problems. I shouldn't say the same, but we had a share of problems in the islands. And, growing up in the 70s, though, it was such a conscious movement of, local people trying to get ahead, feeling like the island was being snatched out from beneath them, which led to the emergence of pro-Virgin Islands senators like who, Karl? What's his name? morning.
morning.
Yeah, Delbert Bryan. Right? I mean, when I was in high school, you're much younger than me. People think you're my age, but you're much younger. You was probably in kindergarten or something at that time.
Maybe.
And but you started to see the emergence of the independent candidate. So before the 80s, the Democrats dominated politics in the Virgin Islands on a whole. You really the ICM, remember them? They were a party at one time. Positive Nelson was like the unofficial president of ICM party for like years, right?
You've got great ICM as Vorden Brown, Delbert Bryan, C. Richards. You've got ICM party was a force, a counterbalance for a minute there. Cyril E. King, of course, is the poster child for the ICM party.
That's right.
Yeah.
So he was Cyril E. King was the second. It was Melvin Evans, Cyril E. King. He was
That's
the
right.
second elected governor.
And then, of course, Wang Louis followed in his footsteps. So you had about, 12 years of ICM leadership.
The youngest governor ever elected in the Virgin Islands, Juan Louis. Mm-hmm. And it was weird because, he was revered in St. Croix. That's when we had Puerto Riqueño in St. Croix. We don't, they're all, mixed in right now. Hispanic, my daughters are Hispanic. Their name is Bryan. But it was different back then. You actually had identifiable neighborhoods that galvanized support for the Hispanic candidate, in the 70s.
Yeah.
So he was monumental too in changing the Virgin Islands because we were in negotiation. They had contracts at the time. There was a big strikes. It was like 8-9 months that they walked out of the refinery and they stood out. It was a very long standoff, as far as I can remember. If anybody got a different memory, call in or hit me up on my phone. But I think it was like 8-9 months. That's Kevin calling in. Mr. Williams, Chief of Staff.
Hey, good morning. Good morning, Governor. How are you?
I am doing.
Morning, Karl.
Morning,
How's
Kevin.
it doing?
Doing well.
So yeah, we're talking about the Virgin Islands. We get into the 80s, but Juan Louis was great governor again. But he wasn't so revered in St. Thomas. It was like, he had this overwhelming. That's when St. Croix used to decide elections.
St. Croix still decides.
No, they don't.
But I do remember Wang Louis' motorcade
God,
passing by, and that was the first. I think that's my first political memory of why is there a parade and walk and rest? And it was his motorcade passing through, and he was very popular. The longest serving, that little VI factoid, the longest serving governor in U.S. Virgin Islands was
so far.
So far.
I'm hoping for a third term any day now.
But yeah, he did 10 years as he completed Sir Lee King's term, and that was the heyday of the ICM party. That led to the rise, '86 of Bert Bryan running for governor and coming down to the wire, and all the forces having to galvanize to deny him, the seat. There was a lot of things that took place around that time that really, there was a lot of activism, and the ICM party was in its full swing coming off.
You
of
look like
those
an
elections.
ICM fan, you're ICM.
So, I've always enjoyed real parties that stand for something, and back then parties stood for something. At this point in time, sometimes I think we're just one amalgamation of the same thing, different sides of the same coin. Back then there was some real differentiation, and I would have.
You mean in the Virgin Islands?
In the Virgin Islands,
yeah.
In the Virgin Islands. I would have probably been, somebody that advocated for, a more local centric party. Coming out, being a rabble rouser, coming out of college, and if you know me, I go against the grain.
That's funny because and morning Senator Francis joining us with us this morning. That's funny that most of us were radicals in high school and coming up through that time. Like I was a big Bert Bryan fan. I was like pro local. We should be doing stuff ourselves. We should be independent. Moving along that. And then he happened to have my last name, no relation, but. I was really hyped up on that. But at the same time, my mom was a big Farrelly fan. So we had lost with Farrelly. Farrelly lost, I think, twice and then won. Or once and then won. My political history is a little foggy.
That happens at your age.
Yeah. I was telling somebody the other day, they said I'm far from 50. I said, me too. I am almost 60. I'm real far from 50. but it was Farrelly was the game changer for me because of growing up with my mom and being a young Democrat. For you too, because you served. Wait, we could make jokes on Novelle too.
Yeah, we could crack on Novelle.
Wasn't he like Farrelly's bodyguard?
I was.
I think he was yeah, man.
I was Farrelly's bodyguard. But I want to say good morning. Good morning to the Virgin Islands, and it's just nostalgic, man, hearing you this morning and just going back in the days, St. Croix was beautiful, back then, and you really enjoyed. And you talk about the split session. My entire junior high and high school was nothing but split session.
Wow.
So that's all I knew from junior high and high school.
Yeah, I hear that. You think modular schools bad? Like it was split session. Yeah. And it changed the landscape a lot too because you had all these you remember going to school and seeing like 5, 6 teenage girls pregnant.
Yeah.
In junior high school we had that problem. It was a very different time.
Yeah.
But
so, listen, I just wanted to kind of just chime in before we get real past the Bert Bryan era because for myself, I think my first political memory was having these big rallies down by Paquitos because I lived in Two Williams and you'd have all the cars lined off and we would go down and see all these people there. I was like, okay, it's a big party, somebody running for governor. Paquitos used to be, he was one of the big men, them, you know what I mean? That
big Farrelly, big Democrat. Big Democrat.
Yeah, that was part of the machine, Paquitos, Eddie Ortiz, there was just certain people you had to ingratiate yourself with if you really wanted to make a political run.
Yeah, and then my second memory was really my mother was a big Bert Bryan fan. And when I came back from college, as young people, you look for that moment when you get connected to your community. And I just remember my mom was a big Bert Bryan fan. And when I came back from college, I ended up having this Bert Bryan sticker on my truck. And it says, keep your eyes on the prize. Don't blink.
Don't blink.
But and I had a bumper sticker on my truck everywhere I go. And I did feel that, he was a motivation. In terms of how I started paying attention to politics. But and then lastly, right, as far as schools, my high school year was totally tarnished. I ended up going to 10th grade because of overcrowding to the Central High Annex, which is now the Juanita Guardian School, and it was only 10th graders going to that school.
So yeah,
and so I lost a whole
that was my experience
in 11,
as well.
12 graders, the seniors, and so forth. And then the very next year, Hurricane Hugo hit.
But that was like, so that was 1988. We had overcrowding in school. That's another thing that we've got. The classrooms were 30, and the teachers union was protesting constantly about overcrowding in classrooms.
But let me be a radical and strike a nerve. So yeah, I was a big ICM fan. I was a big Bryan fan. Still respect and love him to this day. But there was something that I couldn't square very well. When I came back from college, I'm a big. If you really know me, I'm a big Pan-African. Pan-African.
Is that why you had those dreadlocks?
Yeah, that's why I wore my dreadlocks. Until God said, no more dreadlocks for you. But and one of the things is the xenophobia that started to creep in, right? Some folks couldn't make a differentiation between being pro Virgin Islands, pro U.S. Virgin Islands, and not necessarily alienating other folks from elsewhere.
Right.
And my thing was, to tie it back to what you were saying earlier about who could go to school and who couldn't go to public school and those sort of things. Me being a Pan-Africanist, wanting to see a united Caribbean and actually embrace the fact that we as Afro-Caribbean people should be united in our efforts, was a little bit disappointed by some of the more radical elements that kind of somehow wanted to make a distinction. They embraced Puerto Ricans because they were U.S. citizens, but then
lighter skin,
distanced themselves from everybody else.
And lighter skin.
I had a hard time reconciling.
We're coming back. We're going to talk about that transition in the Virgin Islands history in the 80s from being all local and accepting the rest of the Caribbean right here on Analyze This. Good morning. You're here at WTJX FM 93.1, your NPR station in the Virgin Islands. Your host this morning, Governor Albert Bryan, Govy to most people. And catch us streaming at WTJX Facebook, YouTube channel at WTJX, also on Government House Facebook. You got me for the next 3 days. We'll talk. We back in the Virgin Islands and talking about coming forward, and we're going to get to the 80s and 90s, but right now we're transitioning in the 70s. Just a little note, we tripled our population in a decade. Between the 60s, the late 60s, we had about 30,000 people, and by the census in 1980, we had 100,000 people. Tremendous strain on the population. And part of that growth was people coming from all over the Eastern Caribbean and the United States. Some of the Western Caribbean as well too, Hispanic, or coming in and melting in, being the melting pot in the Virgin Islands. There was a lot of tension back then. A lot of, they're not racial slurs, but certainly slurs for people who came from the Eastern Caribbean. Gasso, Garrot, these was really nasty. And then all of a sudden, the community started to melt. People started to intermarry to people from Down Island. The community started to become blended. And that created a lot of tension. I remember growing up and, listening to people say, oh, the island people, them got a big house and stuff. Usually people who move from where they're from to a strange place are the most motivated people. So when they came, they were in the refinery.
Yeah,
they were
came to
taxi,
work.
Yeah, they were in their hotels. They came to work. And, you were talking about that and the reaction of that from Bryan and other people who were very pro-African, but very pro-Virgin Islands as well, too. And you were talking about that transition, Karl.
Yeah, I mean, it created a very awkward thing because, right on a fine line of being pro-Virgin Islands. So to this day, you still have the little third rails. You look at our festival parades, right? And folks, there's still a strong element, and rightfully so, that bemoans the influence of Trinidad and other cultures, and how that has affected, and maybe taken away from what is authentic Virgin Islands culture. So keeping the authenticity of what a Virgin Islands culture is really, really important, but it doesn't necessarily have to be at the expense of other things, right? So it don't have to be at the expense of eating a roti or listening to dancehall music. I remember there was a big strumo about why Virgin Islands artists sound like Jamaican artists, and that became a big lightning rod. But the reality is we did start to blend, right? In my household, I grew up with grandparents that I could trace their lineage on St. Croix back as far as I can go. And then I have, grandparents, that go back to Dominica, that go back to my grandfather, my maternal grandfather's from Panama.
But that was taboo back then. I mean, back then, if you marry somebody from Down Island, it was like really looked down upon. And you know how far we've grown? There was actually an Eastern Caribbean Friendship Day, and it faded out because everybody just melded into one.
We're blended, we're a blended community.
And it was way striated back then because it was a push to put people from the Eastern Caribbean in the legislature, a push to put
not just in the legislature, but also even in school.
Just in
we
government.
had a school that was identified as an alien school, for example.
What was that?
That's the community school over there behind down by Mountain.
Oh yeah,
where you had, that's times
West
when you
Indies
had
Academy.
Well, that came afterwards, but you had this community school that you had to go to because if you came from Long Island at the time, you weren't able to be integrated into the public school system here. I think it was George Goodwin back in the days that really pushed that issue and allowed for those individuals to become a part of our community. But as we diversify, we continue to see where at least I think that there was a level of acceptance, even with the Bryan era, while individuals, talk about native Virgin Islander and all these type of things. You still had individuals that really supported the fact that Bryan stood up for the Virgin Islands,
even though they were from the Eastern Caribbean.
Even though they were from the Eastern Caribbean,
that was some of his
really
biggest
supported.
fans. That was some of his biggest supporters.
So.
Because at the time, you got to understand. I hope it's young people listening to this. At the same time, all of the British protectorates were gaining their independence. So people and you look at like Tortola and belongers' rights and only being able to buy land if you're from Tortola.
Right.
They respected that. So when they came here, they were like, Virgin Islanders don't have that same right. They don't have we didn't have the right to protect our land or to say you had to be a born Virgin Islander. And constitutional conventions.
Yes,
Those were
Yeah.
like, you remember the one with when Bert was there? It was like we were trying to determine status at the same time in the country. It was very, very, very a hotbed of politics, man.
Yeah, Aboriginal,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Virgin Islanders, but folks from the Eastern
remember
Caribbean
that
and
fight
elsewhere.
Tell people that, because we're not, people don't remember. So what was this whole thing about Aboriginal Virgin Islanders?
Well, it was trying to trace, trying to distinguish what a true, authentic native Virgin Islander is, and trying to chase our lineage back to when the Virgin Islands became the Virgin Islands, when we were no longer the Danish West Indies. So going back to that 1917 transition, and trying to kind of pinpoint a point where if you're born in the Virgin Islands prior to this date, you are an Aboriginal Virgin Islander. But you're absolutely right. People coming from elsewhere, especially the Eastern Caribbean, understood native pride and understood native rights. Yes. And so they were supporters of Virgin Islanders claiming the same for themselves. And I think that was, what made it sort of a weird, these folks understand, they get us. You need to embrace them. They're not here to push us aside. They're here to really support our community.
And
I think one of the one of the things that was problematic about that was trying to establish rights or benefits with that status. That if you were a native Virgin Islander, that we would, through our policies and our legislation, be able to afford those individuals additional rights that a regular Virgin Islander would not have access to. And one of those things potentially was who could run for governor, right? Oh, you're gonna come from somewhere else and become the governor of these Virgin Islands to run the territory when you may not understand its people, and those were some of the arguments that created the division. I remember those major fights between David Jones and Senator Alisa Chucky Hansen.
David Jones.
About Bryan. Yeah, David Jones was a remember from my recollection, he was a powerhouse back in the legislature. And those things were now, we talk about status and constitution, and we up to this day we're still trying to get a constitution together
and determine status.
Because would we have lost the benefit of Wang Louis, who was born in Vieques?
Right? Kenneth Map is in New York. I don't know where John DeYoung was born.
I don't think John DeYoung was born in the Virgin Islands. So there was a lot of a lot of Virgin Islanders, including Neville, born in New York.
I mean, it's just a sign of the times and where people were moving.
It was.
But we're speeding ahead.
That goes to the fact of migration, right? A lot of us back then, we got migrated to, for people came to the Virgin Islands to work, but a lot of Virgin Islands left and go to New York. Like my grandfather, and I have a whole set of my family that's out in New York because they left. And my great-great-grandmother, they originally came from like Barbados or Nevis, and some of them came to the Virgin Islands, and then they went to New York and took up roots there. And some of them never returned.
Some stopped and some
returned to eventually become governor.
And then, I think we discount the fact too, wars. The military, the Virgin Islands has always been a big participant per capita in military activity. So a lot of people went to serve. Growing up, everybody was like, it was a great honor to serve your country, and it was big time. I mean, we were the military parades that we had were off the chain. But we're speeding ahead because Farrelly, Derek Hodge was Farrelly's lieutenant governor. I love Derek. Okay, I wanted to be Derek Hodge in high school. I mean, I ran for governor as Derek Hodge because Derek ran for governor and lost in the primary when I was in 10th grade. And that's like 1982, 1983. But I won. I was Derek Hodge in school. I remember going to the campaign thing as a 10th grader and getting all of the Nemi, who he was not married to at the time. She gave me all the paraphernalia to go to school to campaign to be Derek Hodge, and I won. But Derek coming out of being lieutenant governor, trying to be governor, was running against someone who also ran a couple times, Farrelly. Not Farrelly, Snyder. And Snyder had lost, I think, at least 2 elections before. And Snyder changed the game for the Eastern Caribbean. And you got to give him credit for this. Snyder's administration was the first administration where you see the Eastern Caribbean playing a big part. George Goodwin,
Yeah, became commissioners.
That's
You had
right.
Ira Hobson.
Ira Hobson.
Ira Hobson.
Roosevelt David was a big player in the Snyder administration too. So for the first time, you started to see commissioners, people in government house from the Eastern Caribbean, also in the legislature. And I'll tell you how much time has changed, because people tell me, oh, before you used to be able to run as a single black senator. And people would say, well, you don't have now, 2 years ago, or maybe 3 years ago, when I was running, people would say, well, where's the Antiguan representative, or where's, we don't have any more representative from the Eastern Caribbean. I said, but you realize that Alison de Gazon is a Trini, right? Alicia Barnes, Nevis. I'm just talking about
Novelle
lineage.
Francis got Antiguan blood in him.
I was waiting for you. Novelle Francis, Antigua.
Yeah, so
Tregenza Road, St. Kitts. When you go through the legislature now, they are the descendants of that time, that transition time, that all these things came about. Alicia Chucky Hansen, we're talking about the 80s, the emergence of the independent candidate, the strong independent candidate. What was Senator Bellardo? She was an independent or ICF?
No, she's a Republican. Don't insult her.
Republican.
She's a
She
staunch
back then she
flag
was a
bearer for the
Republican.
Republican Party.
Yeah.
I forgot about them totally, huh?
Yeah. And Governor Mapp was a Republican too.
Yeah, Snyder.
you had Holland Redfield. That was
Yeah, the
also
Republican Party was a big party. I mean, Snyder was, he brought the Republican Party back and gave them their final hurrah, as really running as a Republican and embracing other Republicans in the community. And you'd be surprised, there were a lot of Republicans back then. I mean, people like Bully Peterson and there was may rest in peace. The Republican Party was not the xenophobic Republican Party of this Trump era.
Just to defend them, because they ain't here. The xenophobic Republican Party is the xenophobic Trump people. Them. The Republican Party, I think it's such a bad thing. We're going to talk about that later. that the Republican Party gets painted with everything Trump.
Yes.
Okay, move on. Forget it up. Move on. So, it was so coming out of that era, I remember, so I graduated from school in 1989. I came home the year of Hugo. And getting involved with politics at that time, I joined the Young Democrats. Yes. Mm-hmm. And Derek Hodge was running for governor right around that time too. And so I spent a lot of my time in the Young Democrats, and that's where we started first having these forums, like inviting people and senators in to hear what they have to say. In the Democratic Party, and they were right to say this, was no Democratic club can invite an independent to the forum. And I was like, that's like saying like nobody who don't love Jesus already can't come to the church.
Yeah.
And it really frustrated me, because you had these strong independent candidates that at the time in my young mind, we could bring over to the Democratic Party and strengthen the Democratic Party. But it is funny that today the Democratic Party is a victim of its own insularity. And saying that the thought has always been the Democrats are the Democrats are the Democrats, always catering to the people in the party and never bringing anybody new in the church, created this thing where now all our stalwarts are kind of like dying out, I should say, or they're getting older and they can't participate, and the Democratic Party of the Virgin Islands need young blood.
So back in those days, I mean, we met at Midland, across the street from Central High School.
That's right, Midland.
We met at Midland, and when you had standing room only, you had a good diversification. You had young people, you had middle age and older folks. Everybody really came together at that time and was there. And it was unbelievable because Derek Hodge, again, I served as his bodyguard, then transitioning from Farrelly over to Derek Hodge. Right. Where he really. I think for him, he was kind of undecided and waited last minute to decide that he was going to run for governor. Right. So the passion, that he exuded at that time once he decided to run, kind of was excited, and people really came out to hear him and really supported him. Back in those days, of course, he was running with Dr. Heath.
Dr. Heath,
not a reputable individual. Had Heath. I used to fly over in the plane myself and Dr. Heath alone, right? He's the pilot.
Oh, wow.
We flew over from St. Thomas and stuff because he was such a gifted gentleman. He was a surgeon. He was a musician. He was a pilot. I mean, Dr. Heath really
Incredible philanthropist. And he's still alive. But Dr. Heath, we're supposed to be erecting this legislature passed that, a monument to him in Educators Park.
Yeah, Senator Ray Fonseca did that.
I'm amongst these really stalwart young Dems. So I was a supporter of Snyder Map. So I like Notch. I was even a supporter of Snyder Centeno.
Really?
Snyder Centeno. Gotta give them FOMO.
My apologies.
Actually, I didn't support Snyder Map. I was, because like I said, I was Democrat all the way. It's like Derek. And then what happened was I was at the time, I was with Yolanda, and she got a job in Snyder's office. So the second election, I supported Snyder.
Okay.
I actually never supported Governor Turnbull. You know, I great guy. You know what I'm saying?
We all love and respect him.
Yeah. But
I think we're also respectful. I mean, we transition and transcend, right? The individual as the governor, especially in our position, you know, we respected that individual and kind of just moved over because we understood for the next 4 years this individual is going to be governor. So you have to transition and transcend, you know, and move up.
So Snyder becomes governor, and we get a lot of Eastern Caribbean. 4 years of Democratic tyranny because the Democrats are running for governor. Right? Yeah. And then this big coup comes, you know, election night, everybody has on their Snyder shirt. It's a wash. There's no way he could lose. This guy has got it.
Yeah.
Turnbull didn't want to run for governor. Nobody wanted to run against Snyder. As a matter of fact, people wanted John DeYoung to run in that election and held it against him. We'll talk about that later. Held it against him.
That he chose not to.
That he chose not to run against Snyder.
Yeah, but we got to talk a little bit about Snyder administration because, you know, we got to talk about how he really ran the government at the time when we come back from the break.
We coming back from the break. You're here with Analyze This with Govey and friends. Stay tuned. We'll be right back to talk about Governor Snyder. Good morning, Virgin Islands. You're on Analyze This with Neville James. I'm stepping in for him today. This is Governor Albert Bryan. We're on weekdays 8 to 10. This is WTJX FM 93.1, your NPR station in the Virgin Islands. Call your friends. Tell them, Govey's on here with Karl Knight, my chief of staff, Kevin Williams, of course, the noble, esteemed Senator Novelle Francis, talking old talk. Bringing you through the decades from people growing up in the Virgin Islands perspective, getting a lot of memories here. So we were doing it by governors. That's how I do my history. And we're on Snyder. So I know you guys had some thoughts on Snyder. And the Snyder, Governor Snyder, when he became governor, really was the rule with the iron fist. Now, the Democrats were really, really in horror when Snyder got elected. I couldn't stand this lady, and I grew up and realized that she's the mother of my executive assistants. A change is coming. If that thing used to put the chills in me, man. Like the fear of God. Every time I heard that, I was like, we gotta beat these people, man.
Yeah, but Governor Snyder was very, serious-minded. I mean, when he walked into the room, and I remember him from young, right? Because of course he was a surgeon that worked at a hospital. My mom was a nurse, so there was always this level of fear whenever Governor Snyder came to the hospital back in those days.
Really?
And same thing when he got to Government House, because
before he was governor, people were afraid of him.
Absolutely. I mean, because he's so meticulous, right? He's always so disciplined, military background and stuff, like he wants perfection, type of individual. So you want to be right. So, whenever the governor was coming to the hospital, you see everybody cleaning and getting ready back then in those days. Yeah.
You know what's funny about that? Like I have this thing about judging people by what they do. All right. Like when you're a surgeon, you can't make a mistake, right? Somebody's going to die. Yeah. And surgeons are very exacting people. I was just thinking about people who are in the sciences are very exacting and strict. People who run in their own show, teachers, professors, oh my God, doctors, judges, those kind of people, they run their domain all the time. So when you put them in charge of large groups, generally you have some problems.
You have dictators.
But being governor now, right? It's like, I wonder how much of I smoke and mirrors and how much of it is true. I didn't know Governor Snyder personally, but he came from a point where he wanted the best for himself as well as for the Virgin Islands. And the nitpicky things like, he had the two police motorcycles out front with the flags up, and the sirens on whenever he moved, and people really, really hated that. But some people,
and he also talked about having a Uzi under his back seat, right? He said, "I got Uzi, don't mess with me. I got Uzi in my vehicle." You know what I mean? But the governor was tough, but he really had a kind heart as well. I mean, he was an individual that'll pick up the phone and call you for your birthday. Right. Even as governor, he'll call you and wish you happy birthday. But he was firm and just really wanted things go right. He didn't take no for an answer.
He didn't have much patience either.
He didn't take no for an answer. He didn't have
patience.
Get it done.
Get it done.
Get it done.
I remember the people loving his hurricane preparation. When storm came, he would assemble all his commissioners and everybody out there behind of him, giving their briefing updates. And we all felt a sense of comfort that if under his leadership we would be able to get through a disaster or a storm, because he was really on top of things. And that's one of the things I remember. The other thing I remember about the Snyder administration was the finances of the government wasn't really all that great. I remember coming back to the Virgin Islands and working at the Superior Court, or perhaps the then Territorial Court, and we were running out of paper. In the court system back then, that was very paper-driven. We had to be very judicious about the use of paper, because the government, that's the first time that we were really facing a payless payday. Yeah. And I remember, I believe if I'm not correct, we had like a delayed payday under his administration.
No, it was Turnbull.
It
was Turnbull.
Yeah.
But
It was
we
Turnbull?
It was on the tumble. We had to pay. Let's pay it. The wheels
Delayed-
fell out.
delayed payday.
We started to wobble on the Snyder. It was on the tumble and the wheels fell out.
Yeah. We were in, like, I know Turnbull rued the day after he was elected and he saw the government's finance because it was a mess. But it's good you talk about, because we jumped over a thing too, because under Farrelly, we got our first major storm, right?
Yes.
That was Farrelly, right?
Under
Hugo,
That was Hugo.
Hugo, and both the governor.
Daddy Farrelly, listen to me.
Yeah, that's right.
Call off the curfew.
So we could go and party. And during that time, Farrelly was a beloved governor. He was a single man in his first
term.
We won't talk about the rumors around that. He was a single man in his first term, and he got married. People said it was under the pressure of the party because people wanted to see the governor settle down and everything.
Yes.
But he had the storm, and Farrelly wasn't on island. And Derek Hodge, I remember, dressed up in the fatigues.
Yes, camouflage.
Yeah.
Yes.
Going from, they never forgave Governor Farrelly for not being here during the storm. And then it was a crap show because we had never seen that level of destruction before, to be fair.
So that was how Snyder really became the hurricane governor, because he did the opposite, right? He was front and center. Everybody saw him and suddenly started to appreciate that meticulous style that he had, and you know what we used to refer to as being dictatorship. Suddenly appreciated it when Maryland hit. You wanted somebody who made it clear, I'm in charge, right? And that was Snyder. Unfortunately,
I was about to say, unfortunately, some other effects of that. So when Snyder was governor, that same get it done attitude left a lot of people holding the bag because they would just tell people to go to work, fix this, fix that, and then they never get paid.
Get it done, yeah.
The housing authority took $25 million and built a temporary housing facility out there in Nada. That was the beginning of the housing authority. And I remember because Conrad Ricky Francois was at the head of the head of the housing authority at the time. And he was a Democrat, and wanting to keep his job, you know, he had to do what Snyder said. So it created a lot of problems, you know, along the way. But you're right, and out of that, you know, that Derek suffered from that as well too, because when he ran, that legacy stayed on top of him. We eventually came out and made our Hugo. You know, is 36 years later, St. Croix still has not recovered. I mean, that was the most devastating thing. I think people will forget all of the things that have happened along the way that has created us. So the Democratic Party came up with a candidate in Charles Turnbull, right?
Bull, and they found an Undertaker to go along with him.
Oh my God, he was God bless him. He was a terrible public speaker. I was like, we got this dude. We're gonna cream this dude, you know. There's no way he could win. But the night of the election, everybody had on a Turnbull shirt underneath the Snyder shirt. St. Thomas very quietly upended Governor Snyder's reign as governor. And I was
It became
shocked.
anybody but Snyder.
Anybody but Snyder.
Anybody but Snyder.
Los James held his own. Los James, you know, galvanized the Crucian
That's
votes.
right. Luz was the lieutenant governor.
Yeah, that's right.
Another decorated soldier. I mean, again, he was a pilot, undertaker. He was a senator, you know,
lieutenant governor,
president at one point. Yeah, Los James really was a solid lieutenant governor candidate. I mean, an unsung hero of the Democratic Party, because he's been a consistent wire for quite some time, and him partnering up with Charles Turnbull was the difference.
The marriage that didn't last.
Didn't last.
They weren't even out of honeymoon. They were fighting, you know.
So Snyder Map didn't last, and neither did Turnbull James. And
who was Louis Brady? Louis was Brady.
Louis was,
and it was Millen. That didn't last. Louis Millen. Henry Millen, lieutenant governor. Father of
Janet Millen Young.
Senator Janet Millen Young. You know, so lieutenant governors is a story along the way too.
Yeah, most definitely.
They have been, but lately we've been sticking with our lieutenant governors, us governors. You know, John DeYoung did 8 years.
Derek Hodge as well was
Derek did 8 years.
Survived that 8 years.
With the
I think back then you were looking for power brokers. I think, you know, now what you look for are partners. to kind of, I think there was a lesson learned, right? Don't have somebody more ambitious than you are.
No. Governor John DeYoung, when I went to talk to him with some advice about being governor, he says, first of all, get a lieutenant governor. And get a lieutenant governor that doesn't want to be governor.
I mean, eventually, I mean, you know, the legacy for legacy building.
And they all want to become governor later
It's
on.
inevitable.
Greg Francis eventually did. You know, I don't think he started that way, but
Yeah,
Greg
but
Francis did eventually get. I mean, you can't help. There's always a desire for
almost like a
continuation.
natural ascension, right?
Yeah,
So
it's
they
almost a
wanted-
natural extension.
yeah,
So,
so-
you know, Greg Francis didn't start that way. He was very loyal, and then at some point he started thinking, yeah, you know, let me continue the
Okay,
good work.
people
we're
in your
doing.
ear, people get to your ear there and say, "Hey, you could do this too." You know?
So I'm getting all these political corrections. He said Alex was on island. Derek was off island taking his daughter to college. And Governor Farrelly did get married to Joan Harrigan. That was in his before his
Correct,
second
yes,
term.
yeah.
She became the first lady. And all these confirmations.
That's why you're
he's
not.
done.
That's why you're not a history.
Yeah. I'm saying my last week was foggy. 40 years ago. A lot of things have happened in my life since then.
Yeah. But unity, respect, and service.
Who was that?
To Charles Turnbull.
That was it?
They rallied around that as a campaign slogan and basically said, look, this guy over here is pompous, he's arrogant, he's, you know, but we are going to bring unity. We're going to bring we're going to respect you. Whether you know what you're doing or not, we're going to respect you. and we're going to serve the people.
Take the pittance and vote him out.
Take the pittance and vote him out. They were able to really rally that whole anybody but Roy. Really was a effective tsunami.
Yeah, it was a tsunami. You got washed in. You got knocked out. But he left and we say he was put out. Shocker, which is
he would have been. He was the
Matt.
first governor to not get reelected.
Was he?
Well, he was, unless you count Cyril King, who died in office.
He
He was the first governor to fail to be reelected. That was the first time that, you know, the political machine showed that we can short circuit. Up until then, it was almost like it was standard that you're going to get a second term.
And correct me if I'm wrong. Like, has there ever been a Democratic governor who hasn't served 8 years?
No, there has not. And Charles, you know, we're gonna go up to Governor Charles, Dr. Charles Wesley Turnbull, who I was never a supporter of. But after as governor, what did you say, extempore? How does it go? Governor emeritus?
Emeritus. Yes, Governor Emeritus.
He was very instrumental in influence as governor, as a former governor before I became governor. He sat me down and told me the rules. And I became a big fan of Dr. Charles Wesley Turnbull. He's amazing human being to sit down and talk to. And you talk about history. But for 8 years, I protested that. It's like, and it's so funny. There are certain miscreants of his remnants of his party. I got throwing shade now of his term. They still can't get over, you know, that they're not a government house anymore and try to be relevant. I got to throw a little shade today, you know. But most people from Charles Wesley Turnbull started, actually it was Farrelly, started the Democratic tsunami, because when you look at, people don't look at legacy from governors. Farrelly's administration produced John DeYoung as governor.
A young finance commissioner.
Also brought in a lot of female commissioners.
That's right. He was honored for that because
they also brought in a lot of female commissioners.
the first Black AG, female Black AG, was in the Virgin Islands, was Rosalie Ballantyne, sister of Nathan Simmons, and also Finchine, Jada Finchine. Those are real prominent Black women. And how dare we talk about Virgin Island history and didn't mention Ruby Rose?
Yeah,
you know, that was force.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a powerhouse. That's how we knew we had a matriarchal society. It's like the women were running things. So.
Ruby was powerful. I mean, just
when you call female names, Ruby Rose, Alicia Chucky Hansen, Lorraine Berry. Lorraine Berry. You know, I had a front row seat in the Senate. You know, back when I was working in the legislature, as to Lorraine Berry convening one majority And at the end of the session, she was convening a different majority. The only commonality was she was still in charge.
You know what?
She pulled that whole coup. She organized that whole coup and put Celestino White's majority in charge of the Senate, and that was the power of a Lorraine Berry.
You know what's funny about that in terms of politics? Like, because the three of you were talking about a St. Croix perspective. I was in St. Thomas, so St. Thomas didn't have that radical Virgin Islands for Virgin Islands for Virgin Islanders kind of push at the time. Our senators at that time were more statesmen and were very calm. You didn't have the
No, we had to march on the fort. We had to burn down the town. We always got to put St. Thomas on our back and say, "Come, let me fight for this thing, man. Come on, man, let's fight for this thing."
Yeah. We're over in St. Thomas going, why can't we just make some money, get along, and keep this economy going? Okay, let's get some cruise ships.
We all just get along.
Yeah. Just get along.
One thing I was telling the governor the other day, like that's the success of the Tart Wars. Like, if it was a Tart festival, it would have been a successful. But because it's a war,
we gonna be right.
Freedom City Frederickson, we love the Tart Wars.
Right, we gonna get back and talk about war. We gonna talk about the legacy of debate between the two territories, not two districts. Right here and analyze this. Hold on, we coming right back.
The views and opinions expressed on Analyze This are entirely those of the on-air participants and do not reflect those of the station's board, management, staff, or underwriters. The views and opinions expressed on Analyze This are entirely those of the on-air participants and do not reflect those of the station's board, management, staff, or underwriters.
Good morning. You're here on Analyze This with Neville James. You got Gubby standing in for him. 93.1 WTJX, your NPR station in the Virgin Islands. I know you want Karl Mele Sweet, but we got so much stuff to talk about. We haven't even gotten to Jen now yet. We stuck in Turnbull's administration. We forgot the good senator, Vargrave Richards. I got people texting me.
Oh, yeah.
Don't forget Bingley Richardson. Babukana,
Oh, yeah.
you know, and all the other.
All
But
the
remember
Star
when
Wars.
because St. John, a senator at large wasn't no big thing. I think I remember my good friend Rocky. You tell the people don't vote for Rocky. The day before the election, Jen now, in effect, telling people we want Craig Barshender because Craig the vote with St. Croix.
Yes.
You know, he was mad at me for years for that. He gonna call me today about it. He was mad at me for years for that. I was like, it's not personal. You know, St. Craig was our senator, but I fast forward. We go back where in Turnbull, because when Governor Turnbull inherited the administration, it was a mess. That's when we really started to have financial problems. Hugo had put a devastation on St. Croix. Then you had Maryland and
Tourism
St. Thomas.
economy got devastated by Hugo, and it never to this day has never gone back to where it was pre-Hugo, right? And so you really
St.
came
Croix.
down
We talking
on St.
about
Croix. Sorry,
St. Croix.
on St. Croix. And so you really had the refinery and some of that manufacturing, and when that started to fade, when the manufacturing started to fade, that's when our government started to get really lopsided, right? You had a vibrant tourism economy and then the financial industry coming into St. Thomas, but St. Croix was no longer able to have that robust economy. We always had the more diverse and balanced economy on St. Croix, some tourism, some industrial, some agriculture, and we started to become a one hit pony.
Financial
with the
sector
refinery.
too. We had a little financial.
Yeah, the
we had
financial sector.
Citibank here, Barclays. There was a financial sector here as
And
well.
the EDC companies as well.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
that was
So
a thriving.
Turnbull inherited that mess, and I remember that's when I first came to know who Nathan Simmons was, because he was put in charge of the 5-year fiscal recovery plan for the Turnbull administration, and really a lot of my knowledge came from reading that plan cover to cover and trying to see the ideas that were being circulated and floated to kind of pull the Virgin Islands economy out of the doldrum. And I swear, it seems like every 5 years we had a new 5-year recovery plan.
It's so funny. We just named
Nathan
him.
still around. Eh?
Nathan still works for me. Nathan is one of my greatest influences in government, and I feel like he's like a godfather to me. I had a line with him, so he can't be like pops, but it's like a godfather for me. He's one of those people who could tell me about myself, and I not fire them. I got a couple of people like that, but he always give me his frank response, and I treasure him for that. But we just named the finance building in St. Thomas after
Bernice
Bernice
Turnbull.
Turnbull.
Yeah.
And great Joel Malloy from that administration just passed away. Slipping my mind now. A tax. He was Ira Mills.
Ira Mills, another unsung hero. I mean, he has been in almost every administration, playing a critical role. He was most prominent, I guess, in the Turnbull administration, but he's always been there. He was most recently the tax assessor. And he has had his finger on the finances of this government for the better part of 3 decades or something. So
as well as Nellen Borey as well was another powerhouse.
I haven't seen Nellen in a while.
I haven't seen him in a while, but he's been like CFO twice at every place. He was CFO
The
twice at
Wapa,
Wapa, CFO at the Louis Hospital. He was CFO at Snyder. He was OMB director twice. He has certainly done his fair share of public service in his community as well.
Nellen has that same demeanor as Nathan.
Yes.
They're like unquestionable. The legislators are afraid of them. How dare you question Nathan Simmons? It's like something gonna happen,
The one thing that I would say as we go through history that we haven't really touched on is sort of like the energy crisis in the Virgin Islands. We talked about schools. We talked about the population.
Why are you throwing Karl bones? We've never had an energy crisis in the Virgin Islands. It's just since we got this guy Karl running the power agency.
I was trying to skip over that part.
But that's good. Energy and garbage, going back to the 70s, Unit 13 in St. Thomas, down for like weeks, like rotating blackouts. Garbage bins on fire. That was standard. People, they weren't picking up the garbage, they just burned the garbage in the bins. In the Virgin Islands. But you remember those days when we had unreliable power?
way back before my tenure? Yeah, I remember those days. But I tell people that all the time, right? We've always had issues with operations. That's not a new thing. There wasn't a time when the power used to stay on for months and months on end. There's always been issues with operations. what's been new to WAPA, and I tell him it's a relatively new thing, is WAPA's financial crisis and its inability to pay for the things that it needs. And that's a relatively new thing that came in maybe in the last 10 years or so, around the time when oil went up to $150 a barrel. What has changed is our standard and expectations of quality of life have improved. We are so much more tied to electricity and to our gadgets and whatnot. So the same level of power disruptions have a much more outsized impact on our community, because when you lose power, you're now losing internet, you're losing everything. And so our standard of living, and that's a good thing, our expectations of our utilities have really risen from where they used to be.
Right.
And the utility, of course, has to evolve as well.
In terms of public policy, our public policy from governor to governor didn't really make their mark in terms of what do we do with our power electricity grid. I think really maybe up until maybe I would say maybe the young era, where there was some focus on how do we transition into other sources, and maybe because out of, like you said, Karl, the fuel prices, the oil crisis at the time, but there wasn't really an impact. And as we know, energy is critical to economic development, especially now we're seeing that going forward. Like we're that's a void in our public policy that we didn't see there. I think that's something noteworthy to mention.
I mean, we also skipped over this section where, like, Virgin Islanders are incredible people. We didn't talk about the plane crash in 1976 that was the final impetus to expand the St. Thomas Airport. Yeah. St. Croix Airport was expanded as well to get that 10,000-foot runway now. And they had to raise all the money to build all these new schools, because that's when we introduced bonding, and getting the Schneider, getting the St. Thomas, two new hospitals built. That was, I think, but back as far back as probably King
Louis, maybe.
Yeah, to getting St. Thomas moved out of Newt Hansen, and St. Croix moved out of Charles Howard. In 1980, we were still going down here to Charles Howard and St. Croix. I remember sitting in the parking lot. They didn't let kids in the hospital.
Right.
In the hot sun while my brother gets stitches.
My mother was a paramedic there at Charles Howard. Also at Ingeborg Nesbitt when ambulances used to run out of Frederickstead. Remember those days? But
Ingeborg Nesbitt. Wow.
But the one thing, so there was some innovation that came in with the DeYoung administration, and
you're jumping too far.
I'm going too far. Okay, yeah, Kevin started it.
I want to talk about because what happened in the Charles Turnbull is it was the advent of the financial team too.
Yes,
and
that concept of a financial team.
It never had a financial team before, and all of a sudden it was like the financial team. So let's the good Governor Charlie Turnbull, let's credit him with that.
Yes.
And it was the first mention what people started to say, Virgin Islanders can't manage their money, we need a CFO.
Yes.
That was a big thing, you know. I was one of those people that were ringing a CFO bill, like, these people do not know what they do. And this concept that we have way more than enough money, but we have a management problem. Yes. Boy, was I wrong.
That CFO became very controversial, and I do like the fact that we never got a CFO, because it started off with this, Washington should impose, and we need to, the federal government, and as that good radical that was ensconced in the ICM rhetoric of the time, the concept of Washington imposing somebody to manage our finances. To this day, I reject that some outsider needs to run our affairs. They're brilliant Virgin Islanders. You've called a lot of their names today. That if we needed a CFO, it would have been like a Nathan Simmons or a Nelambori or somebody of that ilk. And but that became very controversial, and it really played into the next election, because our good Congresswoman at the time, Donna Christensen, she got caught into that trying to balance her legislation in Washington for a CFO, and it became a matter of who controls it. Is it Washington controlled? Is it local controlled? It kept getting watered down and watered down and watered down.
So what that reminds me of the era is like how Donna Christian got to Washington. It was an era of Ron DeLugo. He did 20 years, and then he ran for governor with Brady, right? Was it Brady?
Oh, I don't know who
it was. Somebody gonna text me.
Yeah.
DeLugo ran, a congressperson, ran for governor, lost.
Yes.
Right? But it created the advent for somebody.
Else to get in.
No.
Yes.
Well, we first got to remember the little footnote in our history, Victor Frazier.
I was, I was
One
going
term.
there.
Yeah, he did
So,
one term.
so what happened? What had happened was, at the time, Donna ran against the good judge Eileen. You know, we got some great
Eileen
jurists.
Peterson, yep.
And it was Victor Frazier, and Eileen beat Donna in the primary and went up against Victor Frazier and choked. No other way to say it. She just wasn't as good as an orator as Victor Frazier. He ate her alive in the debate. Victor Frazier ran and then became Carmen Sandiego. Where y'all remember that? Where in the world is
He
Victor
was
Frazier?
on all sorts of junkets here and there. He was enjoying the spoils of that office.
But that
He didn't
ruined.
last.
Yeah, he lasted one term.
One term.
And then Donna,
Yep.
Eileen didn't run again. Judge Peterson didn't run again. Donna ran and won.
Yes.
And the CFO was like real controversial because Donna is a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat and Turnbull was
Democrat
the
as well.
governor. Yeah, Democrat. So you have a Democrat going against a Democratic governor and saying, we need a CFO. And I got to tell you, I got to take off my hat. That's the first time in the Virgin Islands history that I saw a candidate take an unpopular position and rally it to
All
a
the way to the
popular position. Because, you know, at the time, she took tremendous heat for that. And that is the kind of bravery that inspires me today to take on popular positions because it's about gaining consensus. Truth be told, at the end of the day, we were winding down getting the CFO could get something through Congress is impossible. John DeYoung runs against Turnbull. And this is what this show is really supposed to be about because at the time, I was at the Housing Authority and we used to have this morning meeting. And had me, Adrienne, Yvette Canigate, I used to be in there. A couple of Edwin Thomas, the Kalaloo man. We used to talk politics. At the time, Abdullah Salim, who was a big Democrat, was married to Amina Salim, was my boss and was trying to get me more involved in the Democratic Party at that time. And we used to talk about how things should be. And we knew all these people that we grew up with or know through relations. You kind of know them, but you don't know them, that we needed to get together. And Adrienne, was seeing Paul Arnold at the time, father was chosen by John DeYoung to run for this is from my perspective now because Adrienne and I were friends. And Adrienne came to me and said, hey, you know, there's this guy named John DeYoung. You heard of him? I said, yeah, I heard of him. He's running for governor. I said, yeah, I know. She said, well, I'm going to host something for him. And I want you to come and I want you to support him. And I told her plain out, I said, nah, that dude's going to lose. There's no way that dude could beat Turnbull. I'm going to tell you right now, he cannot win. But I went to this thing and was inspired by what I heard. I said, okay, he going to lose, but this is the guy who should be governor. I'm going to support him, but we're going to lose. Adrienne went into this thing and she said, I meet this young Rastaman dude named Karl. And was,
He was
you
working
know.
at the legislature at that time?
You weren't with
no,
Positive yet?
No, I had Saturday. I was still at WAPA.
Yeah, you was at WAPA.
Yeah,
He was
WAPA.
at WAPA. And she's like, I met him at the John DeYoung. So tell us, you know.
So I was at WAPA at the time, and I actually had an investment club with a few of my friends in WAPA. We were, you know, we used to get together once a week and we invest once a month, and we invest stocks, and we're tracking that. And so John DeYoung was the president of the chamber, but he was also the president of Lockhart Caribbean Company.
That's right.
And they were a publicly traded company. So I actually, as part of this investment club, I did a whole presentation on this growing conglomerate in St. Thomas called Lockhart Caribbean Company. And this young man that was a young commissioner of finance at one point, you know, ran a WICO at one point. So I was kind of enamored with him. And because we were going through all this fiscal distress, I'm like, this is the kind of person that needs to be in charge. You know, he has the acumen to be governor. And so I went to his rally, and while at the rally, I was sitting there, and you know, some lady behind me tapped me on the shoulder, towards the end of the rally, and she whispered to me, she said, "You see something coming in here?" I was like, "No, what are you talking about?" It's like, we're the youngest ones inside here. A whole bunch of old people up in here. Like, we're the youngest ones in this rally, in this meeting here at where was that held? But and so afterwards, she approached me, we exchanged numbers, and that was the beginning of the building of the network.
Yeah, and then you gotta follow to connect the dots here. Kevin, who's on the line now, is her brother.
That's Adrienne's brother.
And then Uncle Junie right there next to me. You know.
Uncle Junie down the road,
Yeah. And then, Raymond was always cool with us. So, Adrienne reached out to Raymond and a bunch of people. And
So y'all realize that we really invented social media, right?
But so people always question, like, what were we? You're a political organization. We are a networking organization. We built a social network where to this day we, and people always looked at the faces of the organization. There were a lot of people throughout the government, and they know who they are. We never outed them, but they, that was always affiliated with us. So whether you needed to go into customer service and talk to Euris, or you needed to go into Wiesner and talk to Julian, we always had, a lot of folks that supported this social network that we had built. And
we started out. Raymond Williams, who is head of the lottery. We started out at his house, and I remember this,
Panji.
He didn't invite we in. We started off in his backyard.
Yeah, right. It was in his backyard. And Karl, you came up with Generation. That was the name.
Yeah.
We at the time because originally we were supposed to be supporting DeYoung, but we felt that we needed an organization that would outlive his candidacy, win or lose. And it's so funny, right? I was the first one who said, like, we should the logo should be St. Croix. I remember we were discussing this. I St. Tomian, You know what the Crucian thing? No, it should have all 3 islands on it. Because eventually we're going to expand to the rest of the Virgin Islands. Never happened.
No.
Never happened. We coming back. We coming back. We're going to tell you, So that was the onset.
Story, let her get a real deal.
And then, Adrienne ain't here, but we'll talk about that later. Stay tuned here on WTJX FM 93.1. Neville James. Analyze that.
Analyze this.
Good morning. You're listening to Analyze This with Neville James. You got Govey Govey and friends stepping in here for 3 days. You got me for 3 days. 3 days of conversation on WTJX FM 93.1, your NPR station in the Virgin Islands. Yeah, we want to open the phone lines, but like I said, they're mele sweet. We right at the formation of Generation Now, and Adrienne couldn't make it today. Adrienne Williams Octolin, who is real instrumental as a founder, original founding member, and the president for the entire.
She was president for 10 years. No, she wasn't the last president, but she was actually president for the 10 most influential years of the organization.
We're not going to talk about Gen Now 2.0. I mean, it ended when Adrienne ended.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so we got together and we said we're going to support this candidate, but we're going to do things that superseded, because we were really concerned, because at the time, all of us were either building or buying homes in the Virgin Islands.
Yes, yeah.
We were in construction, right? I mean, I know you were building your house, Kevin. How old were you?
Children.
I completed the first phase of my house when I was 26 years old.
26. You know, I remember building my house, and let me tell you about this Virgin Islands in the Eastern Caribbean. People would come up to my house and tell me, they would say, young boy, this your place? Oh, God, man. Especially they would come and say, what a white man who owned this house. That's the first thing they used to say. And then when they see you, you know, inspiration. You build quite a nice home as well, too. During that
absolutely.
Period of
And at those times, at least you had friendship. You know what I mean? That came over. You cook a pot of food, and people come and help and get the work done. You know, you just had to buy the material and supplies, and you know, really got family and everyone else to come in and do something.
We relied on our father-in-laws to help us.
Yeah.
And I mean, and it took, you know, it's when I look at the current generation, right? You know, we got started very young, like pushing to build our future, our foundation, right? Yeah. So, you know, when you wait too late in life, it becomes more difficult. It never gets easier. It only gets harder the longer you go. And so we kind of really came back home, you know, from wherever we had scattered and dispersed after high school, really with a mission. And you know, we put our roots down. We put our roots down. We built that foundation for us and our families. That's why, you know, you see a lot of young people come home and they spin around twice and then they're gone again. Yeah. You know, the one commonality our social network had was folks that were really committed to the Virgin Islands. And so our mission was like, hey, we're going to make this a place we want to live. We're going to make this a place we want to invest in.
And it was not
better.
easy.
And work towards making it better.
Yes. Tomorrow's conversation is about returning home millennials. We have a couple millennials coming in here. So one of the things I wanted to express today was it was difficult. I remember my good friend Glenn Moore Martin, you know, when I was about to, you know, start building and, you know, getting into it, I bought a house that was like just starting construction. And he said, you know what, a finished house? I said, no, he said, start in house. He said, start.
Do something.
And you're going to finish. And I always remember that because it is a daunting task. But that was one of the issues. After Hugo, the home builder's insurance went from $500 to $5,000. Remember that?
Absolutely.
That was another huge barrier for us. Young people in the Virgin Islands, we didn't think we should have to send our kids to private school. In order to get a quality education. And when you look at what a policy you see in today, right? The first-time home buyers VI Slice program is a direct result of us having to work so hard to build our homes and understanding that to get people to stay here is there pre-K and pre-Head Start and all the stuff that we're doing around early childhood is a direct result of us having children, paying for daycare, having to pay for private school tuition.
A lot of sacrifice went into building homes and stuff like that. You had to, a 5-pound box of chicken lasts you like 3 cooking. Right? You had to, you had to pass the steak and the shrimp and all those things and just go towards the chicken. You know?
I remember, my son, to 40 pound of chicken for $30, $27.99.
One of the things I remember that we were never complainers. So
No.
We saw issues and we says, and the thing about Generation Now that I prided myself on was I felt like I was an outsider. Right? We went through the historical aspect of politics. I was like, I didn't have a last name, and my mother and father wasn't connected. They weren't commissioners, assistant commissioners, or directors, whatever. I had nothing to do with politics.
None of us.
And no ambition about politics. I don't know how I ended up by that today. But we cared, right? We cared, and we had a love for the Virgin Islanders, and we says, we're going to make our mark our own way. And that's one of the things about Generation that I've always been very proud of.
Yeah, we broke the mold about who you know. Everybody is who you know. Well, it wasn't about who we knew.
It's so funny because Adrienne always used to be like, "You go deal with them people, yuck," like the politics. And I really did. I always liked the opportunity to make things better. Like if you want to really make things better, you have to do things. So I remember organizing, and in John DeYoung lost the election, which I predicted. Yeah. And then Abdul Ali called. I think he called Adrienne, and he said, "How would you guys like to do a show?"
The radio show. Yeah, the radio show.
Yeah, that was our first little hold on. We started doing a radio show, and to Kevin's point, the rule was you can't complain about anything you don't have a solution for it.
Yep.
So if we discussed something, we would have a solution or something to push forward, which took us to our first bill, which was the double dipping bill. That was Kevin hotspot. Kevin was on that where you could, because at the time, unemployment in the Virgin Islands was so high. If you get a government job, you had to wait like a year for a NOPA. People forget these times, it's like, I remember I got hired, and a year later the guy came back and he was like, Rick Moore, he worked at, because I was an economics major, and he said, we got this job for you. It took a year. He came back to me. I had already had a job and working in Hess for a year, and he said, I said, you got the NOPA? He says, no, but I have another job for you.
No, we were very active, what is the revenue estimating conference? What is the territorial?
That's right. No, you can't just brush over. You gotta say, how did the revenue estimating conference come to be?
Yeah.
This is before any of us.
Yeah, we lobbied. We crafted legislation. We lobbied.
We had discussion. We had the policy group had discussion in respect to all of those things. I mean, we did the legislative report card.
Yes.
Yeah, we really look at what policies and diversifying our portfolio. Really,
we took it to that one. We took to Samuel Sanis. And when he was Senator Sanis.
Yes.
And he liked the idea, and he put some tweaks on it, and it became law.
Yes.
And years later, when we had a Governor Bryan, we were able to actually implement the law. And we were very active on that front. But the point I really want to get to is outside of the politics, because everybody always said, we're a political organization, but we also did, mentoring programs.
Oh, yeah.
We did oratorical competitions and gave out scholarships, had a debate club. We did a cultural
the leadership conference.
The leadership conference. We were all about. We took a whole delegation to CBC. I think three years in a row. We were all, and that's the Congressional Black Caucus week in Washington. We were all about community building, building a new generation of leaders. Really working with the next generation.
Think tanks to address those issues.
Yeah, we did.
We should attribute to Donna Christensen.
You gotta give us some kudos.
Like some major kudos, because I remember Clint Ferris was the first person that went and
to the boot camp. But he went to the boot camp first, and then he went to CBC.
So let me tell you,
political boot camp.
Let me tie it back, right? So back to something I was mentioned before. Donna Christensen, and the reason why we have always played homage to her. She had a choice to make between her affiliation and her loyalty to the Democratic Party and the Young Dems, or this little upstart group that was coming along calling itself Generation Now. And she made a conscious effort to invest in Generation Now and really push us forward. And I know the Young Dems at that time were a little bit sour with the fact that she really kind of championed us as a youth organization, the youth wing of the political movement. And because of her early tutelage, and to this day, I mean, Donna has been a staunch ally of all of us. No matter what we're doing in our individual capacities, Donna Christensen has been at our side with every endeavor that we've done.
I will never forget getting into DC airport at 11 o'clock at night, and she's right there. Welcome, Jen, now with this little sign for us. Yeah. Remember that? That was our first CBC. I mean, I remember sitting with Adrienne. She called me on the phone one day and she says, "We gonna have a leadership conference and I gonna get Jesse Jackson to speak to it." I was like, "What? No, you're not." She's like, "Yes, I already contacted his office." And Jesse Jackson Jr. or Jesse Jackson couldn't do it. And then she came up with
Roland Martin.
Roland Martin. I was like,
Martin.
I was like, Adrienne. He was like, we had to raise like 7,000. It was a ridiculous amount of money to get him here. I was like, we can't do it. She was like, yes, we're gonna do this. We're gonna get him here. And we got him here.
We did.
I mean, the Emerging Leaders Conference was huge.
It was awesome. And I mean, oh man, that was awesome. And Roland Martin said something, lit a fire. Like everybody kept challenging us. And Roland Martin came there and he was like, "You gotta take it over. You gotta take it over." And
that and the ascots. The ascots. Kevin was wearing ascots. Kevin Williams was wearing ascots. Scarves around his neck for weeks.
Big up to Robert Rios.
But you did have a chance to meet, back then you were just Albert from Via. But you did have a chance to meet Roland Martin again, didn't you?
Yeah, we ran into him again. He remembered too. I did an interview with him.
You ran into him as governor.
Yeah, as governor. I did it when I was in D.C. Yeah. As a matter of fact, he reached out to me a couple of weeks ago. He wants to do another interview. But all those things, I remember going to Carambola with my oldest. We went there. She was doing something, golf lessons or something. Anyway, I started pointing out plants to her, and she didn't know anything. I was like, how is this possible? I raised this child, and she don't know nothing. And I said, you know what? If she like that, like, there are probably a lot of kids like that. And I came up with this idea. I called Adrienne and I said, listen, we should do 100 kids on culture. Yeah. And expose, Virgin Islands young people to different things. She was like, yeah, that's a good idea. I was the idea man. Adrienne and the rest of them would have walked people. Karl was the one that made it come together. You know what I'm saying? Karl was like a translator. I'd say stuff and then he'd say it and then everybody would understand. It was like Karl speaks Albert Bryan. He told me that when he was the chief of staff. I speak Albert Bryan. But those programs, mad mentoring skills, mad skills. Yeah. We had a Saturday program. I remember Desiree Schuster teaching them how to make Johnny Cake. That's how I learned to make Johnny Cake.
Yeah, we all learned from Desiree. some of us learn better than others, but
taking them to the legislature.
No, it was really good.
The cultural part wasn't just left on for the younger folks that we did. We also learned ourselves where we were. We didn't have a connection with some parts of our own culture, like our festivals. Like almost, I would say 80% of generation our members at the time were never part of a parade troop.
Oh, yeah.
And we actually went to the point we had our own parade troop, our own. So we would buy out the whole section. This would be the generation now section in the parade troop. And we did festivals for, I think, at least 5 or 6 years straight. And without generation now, I can tell you, Kevin Williams would have never been in a parade. I'd have been like, no, not me. I think the only person that never did a parade was Karl.
I took the pictures, though. No, it was a very holistic training that has gotten us to where we are. Lifelong friendships that we fostered, all forged in the commonality of wanting our home to be a better place.
Yeah. But it was never easy as well. I think that as we climbed the ladder and having this conversation, that it wasn't easy. A lot of us were called green. They complain about us being generation now and generation done, right? Yeah. But there was always at the both end of the spectrum. When we started out, we were too green to be given an opportunity or whatever to prove ourselves, and now we're generation done. But
this conversation is very healthy because I think for some of the older heads that looked at us with some skepticism as we were ascending.
Remember that one guy that came there and said, "You guys ain't never going nowhere. We tried this before. You guys will never take over government."
Yeah, that's more locker room bulletin board fodder. But some of the older heads, I think, viewed us with some skepticism. I think we've made believers out of them, and I think now this conversation this morning kind of shows them like, we were paying very careful attention to the political landscape. Like we were immersing and waiting our turn, learning the lessons from those that came before us.
Training up, training up, creating policies.
We didn't just fall from the sky and say, "My name is Knight. Give me a job." We really
Knight who?
I think it's
we came up from the bottom and really worked our way to positions of leadership and
But
trained
our
and honed our
motives-
skills.
Absolutely.
Started
like
from
the
the
one-
Fed
bottom,
off of
now
each
we're
other.
there.
Fed off of each other. You know.
Yeah, our motives were clear and clean. We didn't do this for power. We actually had no idea we would be ascended to either political office, and that's why many of us didn't necessarily run for Senate, because that was not our mission. That was not our organization.
I'm still surprised. I'm still surprised the Novelle did.
No, I mean, I think significant is that was an issue for a long time, that we didn't have a candidate, that nobody wanted to run for anything, you know.
Right.
Nobody
Because
wanted
the
our
plunge. I
motives
took
were
the
so
plunge,
pure-
you know.
Our motives were so pure
Yeah.
in terms of just doing for the budget and just making the budget benefit. And I'd like to say one other thing that I'm still very impressed. We did all of this without any government funding.
That's true too.
I don't recall ever a piece of legislation that says to the miscellaneous section of the budget
No.
that we're giving this 501c3 organization monies to do mad skills, report cards, all
Fundraising.
that
We did
stuff.
fundraising.
We used to sell
that was the
cake.
thing. For as much as we were linked to John DeYoung, you know, the reality is John DeYoung gave us a lot of us our first real good foray in leadership
Politics
roles
and
in governments,
leadership,
right? But he never funded us. He never bankrolled what we did. The things that we did were never government funded. We never had, you know, we did it all. We were out there washing cars one day.
One day.
We did what we had to do.
Old school jams.
Old
Remember
school jams. We raised, we originated that old school jam
old
thing,
school
right?
jam, that's right.
And we raised our money the hard way, so that we weren't dependent and beholden. That we did have an independent voice, and that we could, you know, of course, you know, we will always be reverent to John DeYoung. Given a lot of us, you know, I was still in my 20s when John DeYoung took a chance on me, and you know, I appreciate that to this day. It built my career, and it built a lot of our careers as well. So.
Yeah, good
So big
times.
up to the late Ed Pops. Y'all remember Ed Pops? Big up to the late Ed Pops.
Yeah, we coming right back and analyze this. We having a great conversation, and it's going so fast. So we're gonna take a little break here, and we'll be right back after this. Good morning. You're listening to Analyze This with Neville James. Weekdays from 8 to 10. This is Govey standing in with my friends. Karl Knight just left the building, but we still have Senator Francis here with us. We have Chief of Staff Kevin Williams. We're talking about the good old days when we used to complain about the good old days. And we got a lot to talk about this morning, but we've just been talking about generation now, the advent of governors, the history of the Virgin Islands from a political perspective, things that happen that influence what happens today. I think it's significant for us to be telling this story because I look at Facebook and there's so many social media mavens out there, but really good at complaining, but not really good at solutions. And we complain too about the situation, but it's not enough to complain. You have to organize. You have to research. You have to really put in the work and in order to really be effective in change. And when you think about where we come from and the programs that we have today, those things didn't just drop out of the sky. They were deliberate, and it was actions by a lot of people in this community, not only Generation Now, or organizing that got us to this point in Virgin Islands history. One of those things that we used to do was the legislative report card. I think it changed the game in a big way because it was, for the first time, we wanted to make sure that people were electing people that actually did the job of being the senator, because senators have become super commissioners.
That's correct. We went in and started to take a look at how legislation was being put together. A lot of times we look at who actually sponsored some of the legislation, and kind of just point those things out to the public so that they could be able to make informed decisions and who they were voting for. So we're able to really do the analytics to determine the productivity of a senator. Not just voting for them because of their popularity or the loudest person in the room, but rather look at the work. So we spent a lot of time getting that information from the legislature and putting it into a report card format, so that the public could be informed and what's happening.
Because that push, not only there, but in terms of transparency in what was going on in the government. Because remember, the internet only became popular in like 1999. So it was the advent of email, the advent of internet, the advent of transparency. Kevin, you are a big part about putting that together.
Yeah. I mean, I want to really publicly thank like Ina Hansen. This is how I started to learn the legislative process. People always wonder
archives.
Who's this guy Kevin Williams, where he come from or where he know. But I sat in the journal. I used to go to St. Thomas or St. Croix, the journal office, and we would have to collect the hard copies of the bills, and we would use the legislative website. And I remember after we would put out this report cards, the very next morning, I would get calls on my job from senators. I remember, I ain't gonna call none of them names, but they would call and complain and then try to read me the right act. And I used to tell them, it's the information that we get from the legislature. It's on your website. So if it's not correct, then you, the legislators, are putting out false information. So they had no defense in terms of our legislative report card was always accurate. We cleared up. There was always confusion about primary sponsor and co-sponsor.
That was always a big thing.
Put their name on a bill and said, "Oh, I did this and I did that," and not give credit to who actually crafted the bill. The legislation.
Remember the amendments? The amendments was a big sore point with the senators too, because we didn't have a way of tracking the amendments. Senators was like, "Oh, I am not getting any credit." And one of the things we were saying is, amendments are great, but they don't allow for legislative discussion when you stick them in on a bill, especially if the bill is non-germane. There's no way we could know where that, because you have a bill about taxes and you see a funding request go in, or you see something else slip in.
Right.
Very effective in terms of getting things done quickly, but hard to track. And so we would sit and we would have 3 hour-and-a-half, 2-hour sessions and go over 350 pieces of legislation, one by one. Read them, classify them, what they were, who they were sponsored by, who were the co-sponsors, what type of bill was it.
And we would dissect the bills by the types of bills, whether they were zoning.
Right, put them in categories. Various categories.
The proclamations or the changes to the VI code or appropriations.
Resolutions.
So that we could kind of understand what was being put forward before the public. And then the other thing that we used to do was what I used to look at is a senator's ability to get their legislation passed, because senators would say, "Oh, I submitted legislation to fix the high schools," but you can't get that. You don't have the gumption as a leader in the body to be able to bring that legislation forward and get 7 other members to support your initiative. So this was my bot, Bryan. I channeled my bot, Bryan, at the end of his legacy, or his political career, where Bryan was still the watchdog, but he became less effective in terms of passing any legislation. So as a senator, one of the things that we used to present to the public was the senator must be able to have good ideas, but he also has to be able to work with other people to get his measure across the line as a means of reviewing his effectiveness to do his job.
Yes.
Yeah, that was significant as well too, because you and since then, right, there has been no instrument that measures legislative effectiveness, efficiency, or for that matter. And that report card would show how much legislation you processed, how much was passed, if that legislation was just like a fluff bill or was meaningful.
And then the impact of it.
The impact of that legislation to the politics. And at the time, it's just weird. The governor of the Virgin Islands always used to have the most legislation submitted through the Senate president.
Yes.
There was a lot of things going on at that time, too, in terms of bond issues and different things coming before. So I think that was one of the most significant, or certainly up there, one of the most significant thing generation now was able to produce. And moving from that, we had that radio show, and then Amos Cardi. When I think of the times we were in, I think at that time gubernatorial candidates were different.
Yes.
Marky Biggs was, certainly up and coming. I thought he would have been governor. Dean, I thought Dean would at least be a lieutenant governor, if not a governor. Yet Amos Cardi. Amos Cardi.
Big name circulating.
Talk 2 was like the biggest local show, and Amos gave us a real spotlight there. My good friend Linda Vanterpool was the director. She used to put me in there in the commercial, and asked her one day, why you got me in the commercial? She says, "You think that's an accident? I got plans for you. You and Amos, governor, lieutenant governor." I was like, oh my God. People planning for you. That was my first introduction to TV. TV too. I was working with Innovative and started doing election commentary. I remember John DeYoung election. It was a really close election, the first run. And I remember Holland telling me, "You can't look so depressed on the air. You got to look a little bit more cheery." That's when that by that time. So when John lost, Governor DeYoung lost in the first election, we continued to do our thing. And then the second election came around. And the second election came around, and they were the DeYoung team was looking for generational support. We got in a lot of trouble for this. And we made a pact that we wouldn't support any candidate as an organization. And the principles, like people who...
Want to remain impartial.
Yeah, that we remain impartial. And we just talk about... I remember people, a particular individual calling me, "Yeah, I was on the radio with your subliminal messages, telling people to vote for DeYoung." But he ended up... I remember it was a runoff. And... what's his name? Oh God, came to my house in the rain. We were outside, and he said, "Oh God, why my memory is so bad now." You know who I'm talking about, man? He was DeYoung right-hand man. I don't know why. This is totally senior moment right now. Ronald Sang. Ronald came to my house in the rain after the election. He said, "Albert, you got to come and come to this rally and support DeYoung. You got to get you to speak." I said, "Man, I made this promise." He said, "I was for the general. This is the runoff." And I went and I gave the speech. It was a great rally. And, of course, DeYoung win. And the point I wanted to make here was when John won, we were individually supporting some of us, but we weren't really public about it. And people tied Jen now to John DeYoung. And when he got elected, of course, I became the Commissioner of Labor. Was not looking for a job at all. I was very happy at Innovative. And people were like, "The governor going to call you, the governor going to call you." I didn't really want to go work for the government because I was making good money, you know. But I knew I wanted to work for governor. So when he called me and he said, Albert, I want you to go to labor. I went to my dad's house first and I said, you know, the governor called me and wanted me to go to be commissioner of labor. And my father was like, you tell him no, right? I said, no, I think about it. He said, well, you got to think about what you getting in a politics thing for. I was like, man, you know, Daddy, I want to be governor, you know, and I think I need to know a little bit about government before I do that. And then, of course, a bunch of us got different positions in government. Of course, you became the commissioner of police.
Eventually, you started as territorial chief.
You was territorial. That's right. You were territorial chief.
Assistant commissioner. I was assistant commissioner under DeYoung, and then I went up to commissioner.
Adrienne, and that's the other thing. We were all individually successful in our careers before the advent of John DeYoung. Adrienne at the time was Section 8, and then she started running Section 8. And that position became available in the Housing Finance Authority. Right, Adrienne went to the Housing Finance Authority as the assistant executive director. And everyone there was giving her like a little stink eye because they thought, because she knew we were big DeYoung people, that she had came to take Cliff's job, which is history. So eventually Cliff left the Housing Finance, I think, under pressure from the administration because he would never endorse the administration. So school children say, ended up going to the legislature. DeYoung moved Kurt Vialet from principal at Complex. He ended up going to the legislature. There was a big protest when that happened. How history has shaped Virgin Islands. But working for DeYoung was a tremendous opportunity for me because not only was I commissioner of labor, but I got to be, I wanted to be the executive director of the Economic Development Authority. And he said, no, I got somebody for that. And he said, what I'll do is I'll put you on the board. And I became chair of the Government Development Bank Workforce Board. I did a whole bunch of things under Governor DeYoung. I had the opportunity to do it. The 8 roughest years, I think of all the governors, he had the 8 roughest years in Virgin Islands history. He came in.
It was a tough time.
On a high note. And then we had a 53 cents per kilowatt hour. Because imagine the light bill is 43 cents now. It was 53 cents then, 10 cents more. Businesses shutting down. Then right on that, the Great Recession with Obama. And then right after we were coming up with that, boom, he got hit again with the Hess shutdown. So it was one thing after the next. It was like, that was a lot of pressure, but you know, we had the 8% cut. We had the first time government layoffs in the Virgin Islands. Really tough times to live through, and not his own. When he brought the Diageo deal to the table, I thought that was it. He would be the greatest governor ever. And coincidentally, even though in our administration we refied the GRS, it wouldn't have been able to happen if he hadn't done the Diageo deal. So when you look at history and all of that, so in DeYoung's administration, we got our first attempt to manage government, and then at the end of the DeYoung administration, the Senator Novelle Francis, who was at the time just back from Germany. Was it Germany and Colorado?
Yes, both. I started off and went to Colorado and then to Germany. And then came back,
And he came back and he said, hey, guys, I'm going to run. Focus forward. I'm going to run. And we was like, finally, we have a candidate. And worked on that campaign. That was 2014, right?
2014, yes.
John was leaving. Who was your campaign manager? Who was that dude anyway?
Who was that dude?
Kevin Williams.
Kevin, he did a good job too.
Yes, and won that election. And you talk about influence, right? The first meeting I remember when you organized your office, we were talking about legislation and stuff. We were all there, and who was at that table then? I couldn't. The first time I met him, Javon James.
Yes,
he was the first time I met.
You guys interviewed him.
Yeah.
Interested in a job, Javon.
That was the first time I met Javon James.
Shauna
Richards, who is still your chief of staff to today. And then, that was the South Shore Economic Trade Zone.
discussion.
Hotel Development Act, all those things
Noise
you
pollution,
made happen.
all those things, loitering, all
Yeah,
those
the
discussions.
loitering law. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things I remember on that campaign was we had an ad that says 7 reasons to vote for
Novelle.
for I think no, at the time you might have been number 7 on the ballot. I'm not sure, but we had a commercial that's 7 reasons, and we had 7 things that you were going to do when you get in there. And as generational members that we wanted to make sure that it wasn't a popularity candidate, that our candidate was prepared to enter the legislature and also prepared with legislation ready to go.
Yes.
And that's how we sort of started off. And I think Novelle, you took it from there and ran with it as a person who focuses on big legislation, not just the, nice to have or something that would sound good in a re-election, but actual substantial legislation to be able to run on. And I think that was, again, a marker of what Generation Now stand for and what we were proposing.
I mean, we continue that work. I mean, Karl was the Energy Office Director. He was a special policy advisor to the governor. That's where we created the first poverty plan, how to attack poverty. We've been having a war on poverty. That's why we have all these programs, education, free college tuition. All those things came out of those discussions, and not the whole early childhood plan. Cecile DeYoung led the Children's and Families Council.
Individuals that became judges.
Yeah, that's true. We almost out of time.
Yeah.
Is this the last break and then we finish up?
Yes.
Wow.
Always went fast.
I need to have another one of these shows. We'll be right back and analyze this. This is Govey with his friends talking about what happened in the past. Stay tuned.
The views and opinions expressed on Analyze This are entirely those of the on-air participants and do not reflect those of the station's board, management, staff, or underwriters.
Newsfeed, your source for stories that matter.
From Austria's Schönbrunn Palace Gardens, celebrate summer with the Vienna Philharmonic. Maestro Tugan Sokiev, acclaimed tenor Piotr Byczała, and the Vienna Boys Choir. For the opera and operetta music of Offenbach, Puccini, Strauss, of course, and many more. Join us for the annual Vienna Philharmonic Summer Night Concert on great performances.
Tune in August 29th at 9 p.m. on WTJX-TV Channel 12.
Good morning. This is meteorologist Russ Hurley with your